Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
So amongst the drama of Korach that we see in this week's Torah portion, and which I will talk about much more extensively tomorrow, sometimes we lose sight of some of the other elements that are found in the parasha. In particular, there is mention made of a mitzvah that is incredibly important, but not very well known. That is Pidyon HaBen, the redemption of the firstborn son. Now, if you don't know what this mitzvah is off the top of your head, that's okay, because, well, it's not one that comes up an awful lot. It's not just the redemption of a son, it is the redemption of a firstborn son. So that means that if a woman has a daughter first and then has a son, we don't do this particular ritual. Also, if the woman has already had a miscarriage that had lasted longer than 3 months, and then the first living child she gives birth to is a son, we don't do this ceremony. Likewise, if it is the firstborn of the husband, but the woman had had a child from a previous marriage, then we also don't do this ceremony. It has to be her firstborn at that particular moment. Also, if the child is born by C-section, we don't do this ceremony. So, if you work through the math and work out the probabilities, not a whole lot of children are born that meet that particular criteria. You start off with a 50% strike off the top because it has to be a boy, and then once you add in all the other conditions, it doesn't come up all that often. It has been a handful of times that I've been able to help people in my almost 20 years in the rabbinate to be able to do this particular mitzvah. It just doesn't come up that much. And of course there is the one additional codicil that if it is the child of a Kohen or Levi, then we don't do it either. So, if it doesn't come up all that often, why is the rabbi telling you that it's so important? Chances are that most of you in this room will never need to perform this mitzvah and may only have a small chance of even witnessing such a mitzvah. So how can it be all that important? Well, we have to work back to why this mitzvah is in the Torah at all, of why God commanded that after 30 days, a child, the male child, first of the opening of the womb, will be redeemed in this 5 shekel ceremony with a Kohen. Well, to do that, we have to rewind the clock, as we often do, to the time before everything was in place. So if we rewind the clock, we see 2 very important things taking place that shift the status of a firstborn. The first and most famous is the 10th plague from Egypt. When we were leaving Egypt, or about to leave Egypt, the 10th and final plague, the only plague by its official structure would be potentially lethal, was a strike against the firstborn. As such, those who are firstborn among our people who were spared have a, in perpetuity, obligation to gratitude for being spared, that they, unlike the Egyptians, were not struck down. It may seem strange that people who live 3,000 years later are still saying thank you, but that's the nature of gratitude. It doesn't have to be that you dodge the bullet immediately in order to say thank you. You don't have to have heard it whistle past your head, but merely to have understood that it was a possibility should still evoke that kind of gratitude. As such, a firstborn son that is alive and healthy is something that we offer special gratitude for. Fast forward just a little bit, and we eventually get the appointment of the Kohanim, the priests, the sons of Aaron that will officiate, and the rest of the Levite tribes who will help to that officiation in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle, and then later the temple. Well, immediately prior to that institution being created, the firstborn were the ones who would officiate on behalf of their families and clans. That is to say, the firstborn sons of any particular family or clan served as the priests for their family. They would offer up the sacrifices in whichever altar they built, and they would conduct the services to the best of their abilities. Well, when we established the Kohanim, we'll talk about that more in detail tomorrow as well, that responsibility was taken off of their shoulders. They no longer were responsible for that. But since by heritage they were designated for it, they had to be officially taken out of the rota. They had to be officially redeemed. One of the things that Judaism says very clearly is once something has been sanctified, once it has been raised to an elevated sacred purpose, then in order to remove it from that purpose and to allow it to be used for more mundane things like, working in a field, then you have to redeem it. And this Pidyon HaBen was a ceremony to redeem those firstborn who were no longer officiating in that way. Also, we see in the Torah in general, the firstborn of anything, whether it be vegetable matter, whether it be animal, whether it be human beings, are considered to have that special sacred status with relationship to God. It is the first flowering of our awareness of God's gift of life, whether it be in what we have grown in the field, whether it has been what we have raised in our flocks, or whether it has we have produced within our families. It is a moment of special gratitude and celebration, and as such it is marked by the ceremony of redeeming an animal, if it is redeemable, but many animals instead would end up on the altar. We're not sacrificing children. The story of Abraham and Isaac made that very clear, but in order to show the same level of significance, we engage in this mitzvah of Pidyon HaBen, this redemption of the child. All that very clear? Good. Now, why should you care, right? Many of you are probably thinking, given the odds of what the rabbi described, not probably going to be applicable to me, and, really, do we need to study a law that is not that applicable? I mean, fine, it has some memory, some, ideas about the past, but is this really the kind of thing that I should care about? Well, as is the case for many aspects of Judaism, when there is a particular mitzvah that is not particularly relevant to you, that is to say, you are not bound by it, whether it be Pidyon HaBen, whether it be the laws of the Kohanim, whether it be the laws of the sacrifices themselves, that doesn't mean that there is nothing to glean from its study and its understanding. And this is a prime example. We can still feel the same sense of gratitude, even if we are not in the zone, that narrow band of those required to do Pidyon HaBen. Who here has ever had a new life come into their family and not felt a stirring of gratitude and of wonder and awe? This is something that we can still have reinforced, maybe not through the precise ceremony of Pidyon HaBen, but still recognize this indeed as something that must be celebrated. How many of us have perhaps ignored the flowering of life around us, the first bud of a rose that comes from a bush that we planted, the first fruit perhaps from a tree that we put in the ground? And Torah is telling us that that must be marked, that must be understood as something special and something that we rejoice in, to not take for granted this cycle of life and the blossoming that happens all around us. But that other aspect of the firstborn, that they had a duty that they had been relieved of, and that must be understood, well, that is something too, that even those of us who are not firstborn, and those of us who are not serving at the altar of Jerusalem, can still remember and still be ennobled by. To recognize that although the firstborn laid down their duty of serving as the officiants and sacrifices for their families, they were not absolved of all responsibilities. They still had all of the other mitzvot of the Torah. They still had all of the obligations to their community, to their families, and to their God, that all of us continue to hold as well. That even when we recognize that someone else has a particular burden, the Kohanim in the case of this, that doesn't mean that we are absolved of all responsibilities. And instead, we should allow ourselves to rejoice at each new obligation, each new responsibility that we become aware of and that we embrace. Whether it be recognizing suddenly, hey, I have a chance to perform Pidyon HaBen, which is so rare. The rabbi told me how special it was. I'm going to make sure I don't miss it because I'm one of the lucky ones that can. Or whether it be a chance to celebrate Shabbat because you're one of the lucky ones who can. Whether it be a chance to embrace the rules of kashrut because you're one of the lucky ones who can. Whether it be the chance to engage in your business in a fair and honest way because you are one of the lucky ones who can. All of the other responsibilities and obligations that Judaism continues to give each and every one of us should be celebrated and should still be fulfilled in its fullness. So Pidyon HaBen is not about giving up something. It is about focusing on what we are going to do and then doing it with joy and doing it with strength. Shabbat Shalom.